Rob King, executive editor at large content at ESPN. He is in charge of the journalistic direction of the network, coming from a newspaper background, quite the athlete growing up. We're going to share his story here on the Something podcast. He laughs, but he was and is a good athlete. And this is a conversation. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national radio anchor, where we don't just talk about the work of Rob and fellow colleagues in sports media, but we learn about their personal sides, their human sides as well, to really understand who they are from a holistic perspective and get that whole story. Rob, I'm excited to have you on. I know I've had a lot of your friends, a lot of your guests on, and it was a
Sure.
matter of time and we made it happen. I'm so grateful for this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Brian. Thank you for doing all the connecting of people. Yeah, you've talked to a lot of my friends. I'm really happy to be among those that get a chance to speak with you because you've done some really wonderful things in introducing, my friends and colleagues to the world. So well done by you.
Well, I'm honored to have you on and to be able to share those stories that your colleagues have and your friends have that aren't readily out there. People always are thinking work first, and that's an important part of who the person is. But there's also the role of being a father in these people's lives, or a mother. And so I love touching into those aspects as well. Let's start here, Rob. When you think about the people around you, how is that a reflection of who you are?
I would say it is really just a matter of identifying how lucky I am. I have been so fortunate to find people uh, throughout my career who are lovely to be with, who are funny and interesting and inspiring, creative, thoughtful. I've just been incredibly lucky. And I mean, throughout my entire career, but even in the last, 7, 8 years, I've met some of the most important people in my life. And I'm just genuinely one of the luckiest people on the planet. That's all I can say.
What is your way, Rob, of holding on to the memories of those who have meant so much to you? I know in following your social media platform, there have been so many that have passed that have had an indelible impact on you. Those who you work with, those who you have worked with that are in your life or have passed, how do you remember those people that have meant so much to you and are meaning so much to you?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Um, I think it takes a lot to open yourself up to someone else. It takes a lot to reach across, miles and miles to say, "Hey, you matter."
Yeah.
Um, and some of the folks that you reference, like Stuart Scott, first comes to mind first. Um, but you know, people that I was fortunate enough to sit next to or brainstorm with, um, or hire, and you know, think about contributing to their future. Um, they gave me as much as I might have given them. And they deserve to be remembered and they deserve to be honored every day you get up and go out and do what you do. Um, I think of I think of John Clayton every Friday during the NFL season
Wow.
because putting that guy on the air on ESPN News on a Friday, as much as we might want to talk about sports betting and what that can mean in terms of information, what have you, John's injury report was like gold to people who had friends in the desert. Then you'd get with him Super Bowl. Like I would go out to Super Bowl and we'd have a dinner, and you'd sit with him and you'd see how he cared for his wife and you'd see what a teammate he was for everybody on the team. Yeah, there isn't an NFL Friday that I don't think about John Clayton. Um, and so, you know, um, Stewart's family, his daughters in particular, are still very, very important to me and to our entire ESPN community. Um, and to see them flourish is uplifting, you know. So you don't want to forget. You want to hang on to these folks. And these folks, they come into your life and they enrich you, and that's a gift that lives forever. And it's something that informs why you should always be mindful about ways in which you might be doing that for somebody else yourself, right? I mean, as far as I know, my friend John Kozner used to say this. As far as I know, we get to do this exactly one time, and so, um, the ability to make someone else's life happier or inspired, you can't throw away those chances. And people like Stu and John, they never did.
How did your parents, Rob, growing up, empower you?
So my parents met at Howard University. My mom was a straight A student, cheerleader, perfect, 18-year-old. My dad was a ne'er-do-well fraternity guy. Like, the fact that they got together is a bit of a miracle in and of itself. um, and I came along 10 months after they got married, so they say. No, I believe him. Uh, but they were young when I was born. They were 22 and 21. And so uh, my brother and sister and I, my brother's younger and my sister's the youngest of the three of us, were very fortunate in that, we had young parents who were very, very devoted to us. And, you gotta think about, like, when that was, 60s and the 70s. We're very mindful of what we're growing up in, and very mindful of what we needed to do to succeed, and incredibly kind and incredibly patient and always present. Um, and so I think those things, and they've gone on to great success. My dad's been at the Washington Post for I don't know how many years now. He's past Pulitzer winner. He won in 2003 for commentary, still writing at 83 years old. And my mom was very successful in private business and in the public sector. My dad's a Democrat, my mom's a Republican. Or she was anyway. In Washington D.C., so very much inside D.C., high achieving people. They just set a great example for my brother and my sister and me. And they still do. As I said, my dad's still writing. My dad, uh, you know, loves what he does, and he's very thoughtful about journalism. And I was in the business before he was. He was in banking and a whole host of other things prior. Um, but what my parents also taught the three of us was that you can make big decisions about your life and expect good things to happen. And they encouraged us to live with courage, which is a lesson that I'm still trying to kind of hang on to, right? Because the last 2-3 years have been madness for everybody. But living with courage is a gift, and my parents really gave that to the three of us.
Where do you feel like, Rob, outside of work, where you've had to be the most courageous during your life?
Well, I've gone on record to say that, one of the things that people miss about this conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is that many of us have spent a lot of years hearing these words and doing training on these words and trying to make them good work practices. But some of us feel it every single day. So, for example, when I'm driving by myself, when I put my son in a car and let him drive away, when my daughter wants to be with the person she cares about, when we as a family walk down the street or go shopping or what have you, like, it's our life. It's not an initiative. And so living that way is a form of courage. But then, it's my responsibility, given how much I do care about the people I work with and the work environment we share, to also speak to that in moments where it's really important for people to know we can be better if we're just considering the world in this way. And sometimes it's easy not to say anything in a meeting or say something in an email, but it's my responsibility. Not just because it's, my responsibility is my job. It's my responsibility to my colleagues and my teammate, our audience, to say this wasn't as good as we could be, or we can be better if we do X. And that requires an act of courage, because the truth about all of that is this is a marathon without a finish line, right? Our dimensions of difference will always exist and they will always evolve. And so we're constantly learning. And, I wish that I could have just had a career where I could have just been a cartoonist or just been an editor and just done my job and go home. But the reality is, in our world, like, I have two jobs, and one of them's a full-time job. The other one I could take a vacation from, but this one I can't. And so that requires a lot of energy. And to answer your question, in some cases, some courage.
The beauty in the struggle, though, where do you see that?
Well, I mean, first of all, every time I walk around ESPN, I see these young people who are now fully engaged and their ideas are showing up on our air or showing up, online. I mean, I wish you could sit in my office and look out where I look out and see our our creative team. Like, these people are just wildly inventive. They're diverse, smart. The way they sort of just dive in with people who are focused on subject and verb and figure out ways to present things, like, that's where I see it living. Sometimes I see it living like on the 6 o'clock Sports Center. I turn it on and I see Kevin Agandi and El Duncan. Like, I hired both of them, and to see them do their thing as seamlessly as it is like the coolest thing ever. And I have every now and then I have anchors like Jay Harris or Michael Eaves fire off emails or texts to me that where they see something written or not on our platforms, but out there in the world, where they're like, "Why is this happening?" And I'm like, their courage and their belief in the ability to kind of reach out to me is incredible validation of this. So I don't know. I mean, like, this is a place that wants to be great, and as I wander around, and sometimes I just literally do that. I get up, just wander around. I see so much progress happening in real time. It's really, I've been here 18 years. Um, it's sweet to see.
When you're out there gazing outside of your office window in Bristol, looking out and seeing all the buildings around you, what are you thinking about, Rob?
So, to be honest with you, Bryan, beyond the buildings is it's not really a mountain range, but there's some like hills out there. And what I told myself when I first started at ESPN was, because I started in the fall, and fall here in Connecticut is just spectacular. Like, the trees just start showing off. And I remember driving into campus and thinking, if I ever get to the point where I'm so frustrated or distracted or disillusioned that I don't see those trees and those leaves, it's
Wow.
time to go. And so, now it's December and the leaves have all fallen. So it's kind of, gray and green, and then we'll get the snow and that. But I have never felt that in 18 years. And I still kind of, as I pull into campus, I look at those hills, just because they're in the background there. And I'm like, yep, still paying attention.
Being present, you talked about that. You just mentioned that's an important part of who you are. How do you become present, and how have you worked on that muscle that is to be present around your kids?
Well, I've always wanted to be a dad. I know that about myself. I was actually talking to a friend of mine back in April, and I was saying the one thing that I was certain about in my life was that I wanted to be a dad. I have a great dad, and he had a great dad, and like, so, very, very fortunate in that respect. Um, and yet becoming a father was hard. We built our family through adoption. Um, so now we have 3 kids. We had too many kids. Anybody want a kid? No, my son is he's a freshman in college at Temple. he decided to join the family business and study communications. And I have daughters who are a sophomore and a freshman in high school. And, you know, what I want for them is to aspire to what I aspired to, which was, you know, my parents were the coolest people on the face of the planet. And I want them to believe that. Definitely want them to believe that about me. And I want them to feel as though that is never going to change. And that is something that they are capable of, right? You know, parenthood is about being a modem that's on send, not receive. Okay. So, you know, and that's also true when you come to the decision to adopt, right? Because I claim no sort of genetic pride. My kids are all amazing, and it has nothing to do with me. But it is about what you send out. And, you know, for the young people who might be watching this, modems were things we used actually to get on the internet. So, you know, I feel like when you learn that it's about um, giving, really rich giving, mindful giving, then it becomes easy. You know, my son's home for Christmas. Let me tell you what, I am sleeping really well now. Like when he's away, I don't sleep. And, you know, at some point I kind of have to sort of say, well, I gotta have to sleep without the boy being in the house. But, you know, he's a dude now. And it's the coolest thing ever, right? And so maybe there is a little receive. It's still a lot of send. Like he asked me for $40 just now before he went out. So, you know, still a lot of send. But no, I just, you know, I know where my parents are at all times. And I'm blessed to still have them. And, you know, I'm blessed to be able to sort of be somewhere in their vicinity with these three stinky people.
You're a cool dad. You've got cool parents. And so much of what you've done has been laid out from a hard work and a grit and an ambitious standpoint from your parents. And you hope, as you were just discussing, Rob, the ability to roll that out for your own kids and that they have that as well. Seeing the way in which your parents raised you with that courage, with all those teaching tools, how much pressure did you feel to make them proud as your journey in life, in your work, and you took the steps to climb up the ranks, to say to yourself, sure, you have your own inner drive, but you've set out on this dream in large part to make your parents proud, to get that validation that you've talked about?
I'm not sure that's right. I don't feel as though I set out to make my parents proud. I feel as though they made my brother and sister and me feel invincible. And our grandparents contributed to that. We believed, this is the thing, right? So, and this is a really important thing, I think, to say. There's two things I want to say. The first is that, as I said, you can make big decisions about your life and expect good things to happen.
Yeah.
Right? That is a gift from my parents. My parents changed careers multiple times. Like we watched them do that. They didn't say anything to us about that. They just did it. And we watched them. And they have had incredible success. And so that became the way we thought we could live our lives. My grandmother, my father's mother, like went back to college and got her master's and her doctorate. Like we saw examples of folks saying, no, this can be done. So we grew up believing that. You know, I grew up with the foolish belief that I was going to be a cartoonist. That was the only thing I was ever going to do. And in fact, I was a cartoonist for 7 years, and I was an editorial cartoonist, and I actually did that. It was only when I had mentors who told me, no, you're probably, you could do bigger things in the newsroom and you're a little too important, you have to do more, that I had to sort of change course. But like, it was a ridiculous dream that, they closed all the cartooning factories, there are no cartooning jobs, and I lucked into a cartooning job, right? So, and my brother and my sister would tell you the same thing. We just were raised to believe good things were going to happen. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that, and I just read this, incredible article by this brilliant writer from Canada about, the economy of hope. That, many people go into their work lives thinking, yeah, I'm going to do this job and this is kind of my life. And yeah, I had that great experience when I went on this holiday over here, but I know that St. Lucia will always be there and I may or may not get back to it, but this is my life. And this writer was like, I choose to believe in this economy of hope. I do believe that there are things that one can do that are based in the expectation of good things. And I was like, that is exactly right. The other day I was watching a video of Prince, one of my favorite artists. He keeps giving, even though he's passed on. And in this video, he says, our brains are really just file cabinets. They're there for storage. We shouldn't think with our brains. We should think with our hearts, right? And I do believe that the creative spirit comes from thinking with your heart, telling stories with your heart. I do believe that, incredible innovation comes from believing in your heart, and creating with your heart. And that is a gift that our parents gave us. Our parents gave us the gift of actually hoping and thinking with our hearts. And when I sit at a table with people sort of brainstorming story ideas, I've gone from the place of saying, I think this is the best idea, to listening to someone who's thinking with their heart and trying to dive in to support them. Because that's a real important economy to build.
If we were to unpeel the layers of that heart, what's inside of it for you?
Two things: goofiness, because I believe goofiness is good, and faith. Um, and you can read that however you want. But I've spent a lot of my life believing in the impossible, and I believe in it more than ever before. I think that many times when I sort of tell these stories about things I've done in my life or moments I've had in my life, the first thing somebody might say is, no way. And, now that I've spent a little time sort of cataloging some of this stuff, it really is sort of one of these things where it's like, you know what? If somebody had told you that X would happen or Y would happen or Z would happen, you'd be like, no way. But it all has happened. So why would you not believe in the impossible? And so I have this crazy, crazy renewed sense of faith.
Rob King is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. The faith that you've had in yourself, in what you could do, how far back can you trace that as a child?
That's a really good question. I think it starts with stories my parents tell. Like, so you understand, like when I was 3 years old and my brother was a newborn, my parents moved us to Germany. My dad had a job in the Secret Service, and my mom, who was a school teacher and was pregnant with my sister, stopped working. So mom, who was super bored, decided to teach me how to read when I was 3.
Wow.
And yeah, and I read it at an incredibly high rate. So much so that when my parents, again, remember, they're only like 22 years older than I am, they would have dinner parties when I was 5. And we'd be put to bed and they might have a few libations. And so they would wake me up and pull me out and give me the New York Times, and I would read the New York Times. Everybody would be like, wow, 5-year-old can read. So I think that that was the seed of a high achiever, look what Rob can do kind of thing. I felt like I was performing at that point. my mom tells the story about coming to get me in first grade, and the teacher sitting out on the curb smoking a cigarette, and my mom's saying, "Am I late? Where are the kids?" And the teacher says, "No, no, no. Rob's in there reading to the class." Like, so I've had kind of that thing from the beginning. But like, I don't know. I think my grandparents and my parents, and really the entire sort of King side of the family and the Stewart side of the family, has been super protective, super supportive, very much in the realm of it's all possible. So I guess my brother and sister and I would just say, like, we lucked out.
There is some added elements than the luck. And I know that your humility comes out with the things that you've done. I just don't see, I see more of an empathy from you than full on competitive and competitive and competitive. I'm sure there's part of that that you have within you, but where does empathy stand with you in your life in total? Obviously, you need it in journalism. And I feel like as I'm getting to know you, that empathy is all around you.
Well, I am competitive. Let's be clear about that. But I do think that we've learned a lot of things over the last 6 or 7 years, not the last 2 years. The last 2 years have just been a conflagration, but the last 6, 7 years, particularly lessons we've been taught by those we cover in sports, but those we cover, period, about the degree to which they are going to just let us tell stories about them, rather than stories that are truly close to their real stories.
Yeah.
And that, I think, has forced a lot of storytellers to check themselves. I mean, I personally have felt that for much longer. You go into a locker room, and there are fewer people who looked like me, 20 years ago when I walked into a locker room. The players always saw me. The reason Stephen A. Smith is Stephen A. Smith, and I've worked with Stephen since 1998 at the Inquirer, is that he always did the work and was always seen by the players. Same with Michael Wilbon. When I ran our NBA coverage, like, Wilbon was always late to the set because he was in the locker room being seen and talking to the players. J.A. Adonde, Mark Spears. Like, there are people that I think about all the time who, Kimberly Martin, who are like in the locker room and being seen by athletes. Oh, I see you, right? Yeah. I think that is much more present now because if you're not empathetic, if you don't stop and pause and ask, how did we get here? You could race right to your own thoughts and miss the story.
Yeah.
And I think that one of my favorite parts of my job now is working with a group we have at ESPN called the Inclusive Content Committee, which is a wide array of diverse perspectives. And we look at stories at inception or in progress or afterwards. And I learn. And, I'm supposed to be the wise old man, but I'm still learning. I think that's really, really important, because the people that we're telling stories about, and I mean really meaningful stories about in real time, deserve that level of introspection. It could be Zion Clark, who was born without legs and won a wrestling MMA match last night. It could be Brittany Griner. Yeah. It could be Mbappe. It could be, it could be anybody. Like, I always tell people, like, how do we know? How do we know this is the story? And when the answer is, well, here's how I know. It's the greatest thing ever. One of our great writers, Seth Wickersham, wrote a piece about Andrew Luck just a couple of weeks ago. And it was so incisive and so real and raw. And you have no uncertainty about how Seth knows. That's storytelling. That's the storytelling that our audiences deserve. Because we can all observe everything. We can watch everything. But to actually know, that's harder to do. And so I believe that starts with empathy. I believe that starts with a sense of, I don't know your story, but I want to know, and you deserve to be able to tell it. And that's where I live right now.
And that's where I hope that this conversation lives, and being able to I hope you feel from me, Rob, as we wrap up this conversation, the empathy that I feel, in wanting to get on level with you, where you're able to share these really beautiful anecdotes about your life, where we go well beyond what you're doing at ESPN, and we learn about your insights as a father and as a son, and how you won't forget the trees around you, how you're very present about things that many take for granted. And to say what you've done is incredible. Knowing you, it's not incredible because it's you. You've done it. You deserve it. And I'm so grateful for this time. Rob King, ESPN Executive Editor-at-Large with their content. I'm Bryan Fenley. This was so fun, Rob. Thanks so much for the chat. Really means a lot.
Right on, Bryan. Thank you very much. And keep doing what you're doing. It means a lot to people.